American Civil War was one of the major wars that happened in the history of America, where maximum number of American soldiers got killed. Now this war waged for a period of 4 years from 1861 to 1865, and after this war, immediately after this war, we witnessed assassination of Abraham Lincoln, who was one of the major figures behind the American Civil War. Gone with the Winds is one of the major novels which is written by Margaret Mitchell, and this novel talks about the life of the slaves from a slave's perspective. Later on, it was adopted as an American film. Now, why this American Civil War was so different from other civil wars that waged across the world? This war was a war that happened between the North and the South America. The northern states of America versus the southern states of America. Now, South during that time was an agricultural region. Agriculture was mainly in the form of plantation of cotton and tobacco. However, North was highly prospered and industrialization picked up a pace rapidly in North America. As a result, the regions in the North wanted the abolition of the practice of slavery. However, the southern states, which were agriculturally dominated, wanted these slaves for the purpose of agriculture. So culturally, with the opinions, there was a huge distance between the ideologies and the opinions of North and South. Under the leadership of Abraham Lincoln from the Republican Party, this idea of ending and abolishing slavery was proposed. So how these developments took place is very, very important. It is attributed that there are 4 major reasons why civil war happened in America. The first one of that is slavery, on which we would come in a while. The next is the question of states' right. That means the state in the South America, in the southern states of America, wanted that the federal government should not interfere in their day-to-day affairs, and also they reserved the right to reject any of the decisions that came from the federal government. The next was election of 1860, where as a nominee of Republican Party, Abraham Lincoln was elected as the President of United States. He wanted to abolish slavery, and therefore the people of southern states considered him as an enemy, and this was another reason responsible for American Civil War. The last reason was secession, and that was the separation of the southern states as Confederate states of America, which we would understand in a while. So let's talk about slavery first. As I mentioned, Republican Party in the North was against slavery. Now, the North state was prosperous due to industrial revolution and the industrial progress. North wanted to shun slavery. However, South, which was with the farming, wanted slaves for their agricultural farms. So there was 2 major differences. One was the difference in the opinion, the difference in the ideas that slaves should be there or should not be there, and the next was the cultural difference. Also, there was an anti-slave movement of 1840. Now this was a threat to the South, and South wanted that this anti-slave movement should abolish, and there was that was one of the inevitable reasons why this American Civil War took a pace. So when we focus on slavery, the developments are very important. In 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote a novel which was Uncle Tom's Slavery, and this novel explained how the worst consequences of slavery was witnessed in America. Later on in 1850, during 1850, there was also a Fugitive Slave Act which made the slaves extremely insecure in the territory of America. How? This Fugitive Slave Act said that the slaves who have fled because of the tyranny of the owners should immediately return back to the owners, and this was a curse for the slaves. So this Fugitive Slave Act made the conditions of slaves highly vulnerable, and Then there was another development. The last development was abolitionists. Abolitionists wanted to abolish slavery, and therefore they had a secret plan. The plan was to develop an underground railroad from America to Canada, and through this railroad all the slaves could migrate to Canada. The reason being, Canada is one of the regions where slavery was not witnessed. So, during this route, the entire underground railroad project which was done, there were numerous hiding sites, or we could say hideouts, where these slaves could secretly stop and they could easily move to the region of Canada. So these were the developments that were witnessed during that time under the issue for the slavery. The next was secession. Now here in the 1860, what happened, as I mentioned, these southern states, you can see the different symbols for the two groups, the Northern Union and the Confederate of America. So these were the territories which were part of the Confederate of America, and the southern states separated from the Union as soon as Abraham Lincoln came to power and he was elected as president. So these southern states chose their president separately, and who was he? He was Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis became the president of the Confederate States of America, which were the southern states. As the states left the Union, the Federation, the North, the regions of the North, we could say, they had all the federal properties seized within the borders of the Confederate. Now, what were the major we could say states during that time in the Confederate? So the major states were California, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana and Texas. These were the major states which are part of the Confederate States of America, which wanted slavery to remain. Now, what developments took place were interesting, and Fort Sumter was one of the regions where Confederates fired, and Lincoln declared a blockade on the ports, and this was in 1861 when the Civil War began. American Civil War was one of the wars that led to emergence of great leaders. Now here in this Fort Sumter, you can see those which are marked in red were the locations of Confederates. However, those which are marked in blue were the regions or the territories of the federal locations, and this Civil War started with Fort Sumter. Now, what were the events under Fort Sumter have been very important, the events under the American Civil War. So, Abraham Lincoln, who got elected as a president in 1860, wanted to end slavery. He was called as a great emancipator, and emancipation of slaves was his motive. This war, the American Civil War, which was started, remained there for a period of 4 years with an ultimate surrender of South and abolition of slavery, end of slavery. In 1863, only slavery was abolished by Abraham Lincoln. However, the war continued till 1865 April. Now, some of the important things that we need to know as an event of this war. The first was, there was the proclamation. This proclamation which was led by Abraham Lincoln won sympathy from foreign powers like Great Britain. The proclamation made it impossible for a liberal country to actually wage a war on behalf of slavery, and after this war became the seas of Confederacy. That means the Confederate States of America got surrendered, and there was a single union in which America got united again. So there was the Battle of Appomattox, and this battle of Appomattox was important. Here there were two important leaders. One was Army Robert E. Lee, and he was the commander-in-chief of the Confederate Army. On the other hand was Ulysses Grant, and he was the commander-in-chief of Republican Army, the Union, we could say, during that time. And Grant later became the president of America. So it was between the Union versus the Confederate again. So Union and Confederate again had a final standing, and it was on 9th April 1865 that with the Battle of Appomattox this ended. The American Civil War ended, and Ulysses Grant later became the President of America. So what were some of the results of the Civil War? To put it in a quick summary, we can say most of the battles that were there were fought in South. This damaged badly the soils of the South. South was known for agriculture, and it required a huge period of reconstruction to revive its land. So that was a severe setback to the land in the South. The next was the major thing that we have been discussing so far, and it was abolition of slavery. The southern states, which were the Confederate states of America, had to surrender, and federal government became the supreme authority in United States. Later, this war also speeded up the economic revolution at a very fast pace, and even in the South there were cases of economic changes and economic prosperity which were witnessed. Now, what was the role of Abraham Lincoln? To have a brief summary about his life first, he was born in 1809 in a log cabin in Kentucky, and he lived a life of hardship with lots of manual labor in his early days. Later, he served in Illinois legislature for 8 years from 1834 to 1841. He basically retired from the politics and then worked as lawyer in Illinois. Later, he wanted to re-enter politics. So in 1858, he re-entered politics and contested for the position at Senate. However, he lost himself to Stephen Douglas. Now, what happened was he became a nominee of the Republican Party in 1860 and finally got elected as the President of United States. He was the 16th President of United States of America. He was a great orator. He brought an end to the slavery in 1863 and was responsible for union of the northern and the southern states in America. Finally, he was assassinated in 1865 after the Civil War ended by a fanatic, John Wilkes Booth. And John Wilkes Booth assassinated him while he was watching a movie in a theater. Now, his speech of Gettysburg is one of the major speeches in the history because it was during the speech of Gettysburg that he gave the words of democracy that are still quoted by all of us. Also, his views on slavery were very, very staunch. He said that if slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong, and therefore to abolish slavery is essential. He fought the war, and that was mainly to end the slavery. So his address at Gettysburg is important. The Gettysburg speech happened in November 1863, and this was a platform to honor those soldiers which have been killed in Civil War. The main speaker during that time of the Gettysburg address was Edward Everett. However, Edward Everett was known then, but we as part of history now do not remember the words what Edward Everett said, but we do remember the words what were put down by Abraham Lincoln. And in his speech, he said that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and in this he gave the definition to democracy, which is considered as the present definition to democracy, and that was that government of the people, for the people, and by the people shall not perish from earth. So his speech became the foundation speech for the present day definition of democracy. He is mentioned that he also mentioned in his speech that there are many great tasks to do ahead in life. So that was about a quick understanding of the American Civil War. As a recap, we talked about the causes that led to American Civil War, the 4 causes: the slavery, the questions of states' right, the election of 1860, where Abraham Lincoln was nominated as the president, and finally the secession. The next is the main events of the war, where Abraham Lincoln was called as a great emancipator. The war continued for 4 years with the abolition of slavery, a federal government coming up as a supreme power, and the south areas where the civil war waged was the region where the soil conditions depleted, and it required a period of reconstruction because south was mainly agricultural during that time, and all this was led under Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln, who was the 16th president of United States, was responsible for ending slavery, bringing in a unity and creating a union again with a federal government, a strong federal government in America. Later he was assassinated by one of the fanatics, John Wilkes Booth. So that is about a quick understanding of American Civil War. We would be covering many further interesting lectures in history. Stay tuned. Have a wonderful day ahead.